It is good to be back with you as we continue our Lenten journey together and our journey through the story. This past week, we talked about the book of Ruth. It is a shorter chapter, a shorter book of the Bible, a shorter chapter in the story. And yet there are many things that we can learn about, many things that we can glean, many things that we can apply to our lives. This coming week is election week in Missouri. Super Tuesday will have wrapped up, and it's time for Missourians to vote. Every 4 years, we start seeing bumper stickers, we start seeing yard signs. In many ways, we increasingly become tribal. Tribal in the way that we vote, tribal in the way that we look at people who vote differently than us, who hold different values than us. The fact of the matter is that we can continue to refine down. We can say we agree on a big thing and then a medium-sized thing and then a small thing. But then what happens so often is we keep looking for those points of disagreement and even those minute things. And then we elevate those to such a level that we stop seeing the humanity in someone else, in our neighbor. And we start seeing those things with which we disagree. The story of Ruth gives great insight in how best to look at that for her, in her life and her actions, but also in our own lives as well. We have gone through the story so far, and we know enough that there are two things that God gifted the Hebrew people with in their history. The first thing that God gifts them with is the law. Now, this law is presented in the wilderness. The law is there. It's good. It is to show how we are to respect God, how we are supposed to understand that relationship, but also through that, how we are to live with our neighbors, how we are supposed to make sure our own lives are healthy, but also our relationships are as well. The second thing after the law that God gave the Israelites was the land. We've talked about that in previous chapters and previous conversations. And yet the story of Ruth, in many ways, it turns everything we've heard about so far up on its ear. Well, the story begins in Bethlehem. Bethlehem, that we know as the city of David, we know it as the birthplace of Jesus. But before it was known as any of these things, it is known as the city of bread. A place that apparently there's always enough to eat, enough bread, enough meat. And yet there is a famine that is going on. And so we have the story of Naomi and Elimelech, and they leave with their two sons. They go to Moab as economic refugees because there's something there that they need. It is food, it is shelter. And so they are displaced persons. They go to a foreign place filled with foreign customs. Apparently they are welcomed in because their two boys marry Moabite women. Now we're told earlier that the Hebrews, the Israelites, are not supposed to intermarry with people who worship different gods. And yet the two sons marry these Moabite women, these foreigners. Now things turn much worse. And I said on Sunday that I was a fan of country western music, especially from the 60s and the 70s. And the story of Naomi could have been sung by Johnny Cash, by Merle Haggard, by Willie Nelson, by Waylon Jennings. First off, they're hungry and things are going bad in Bethlehem, and so they get into whatever is the equivalent of a truck and they caravan over to a foreign place. And when they're there, Naomi's husband Elimelech dies, and 10 years later, the husbands of the two children, her two sons, they die. And all that's left for Naomi in the midst of all this heartache are two daughter-in-laws, but these are two special women as well. We're told that one of the daughter-in-laws, Orpah, wants to remain and stay with Naomi as she plans to return to Bethlehem, the place of her family, the place that now has food, she is told. And Ruth is there as well. And Naomi says, "It is far more bitter for me than it is for you. Go back to your families. You still have, you still have a position. You still have a position there, even though you are widowers. Your family is there. The familiarity of faith is there. And also you have the ability of maybe having a new family with being married again." Orpha, we're told that she cries and she tries to remain, but at last she relents and she goes back. Ruth, on the other hand, she clings to Naomi. She's not going to let her go. There's something about Naomi, but there's something about Ruth as well. And so when Naomi sees that Ruth is not going to let her go, she relents and they make that journey back to Bethlehem. Now, Ruth had all the position, all the prospects. Everything was in Moab for her. And yet, Ruth leaves that behind because of the person of her mother-in-law and because of that relationship. So many times in our own lives, we get caught up in political differences or economic differences or religious differences or social differences. And we don't see the humanity in the other person. We don't see the divine spark in them because we have determined that they are somehow other because we disagree with them. They are somehow wrong because they're on the other side of a border or on the other side of an argument. This should not be so, friends. This is the story, I think. This is the point from the story that we need to live out, that we need to hold on to this week and moving forward as we vote, but also as we interact with our neighbors. It's okay to believe in a candidate. It's okay to vote for a political party. But let us never see that difference and elevate that difference over the persons and the people that God put into our lives every day. Ruth chose the person, and it was based off love. And through that loving relationship, God did amazing things. Even so much that her grandchild, King David, would eventually be lifted up as the greatest king of Israel, and that Ruth and David would be in the lineage of Jesus, that ultimate promise. As we continue this Lenten journey, may this be our prayer, may this be our hope, but also may this be our action, that we emulate Ruth, that we emulate especially as we get closer and closer and closer to the cross, to Holy Week, that self-sacrificial love of Jesus. Because yes, it is powerful that Jesus died for our sins. Yes, it is amazing, wondrous love that he rose from the dead and he conquered both sin and death. But if we do not reflect that love, if we do not seek to emulate that love, if we are just content on accepting that story and not living it out in our lives with our neighbors, then we are missing the greatest opportunity of our lives. Have your positions, have your politics, have all of these things. Vote and vote with conviction. But may we see and may we honor the people God puts into our lives this day and this week. Coming up this Sunday, Saturday and Sunday, we're going to make the next step. We're going to hear about the story of the prophet Samuel. It's one of my favorite stories in the entire Bible. And in fact, it's the genesis of our son's name, Samuel. So beloved is that call story of the prophet Samuel. We'll also hear about Saul, the good and the bad and the ugly of Israel's first king. And we will talk about that while Israel has kings, while we have presidents and governors and mayors, that ultimately our hope is not in princes, but our hope is in the Prince of Peace. I hope you can join us for worship on Saturday night at 5 o'clock and on Sunday morning at 8:30 and 10:30. We have a special musical presentation on Sunday morning at the 10:30 service that I know you will enjoy. We also have the spaghetti supper on Saturday that benefits the Boy Scouts and a Saints and Siblings event that goes on Sunday as well. You can discover all these things on our website, discoverstmark.org, and also on our church's Facebook page. And as always, if you have any questions, I invite you to pass along a comment or talk to me individually. I'll be happy to address that in worship or here in our midweek St. Mark Spark. May you be blessed. May you seek to be a blessing. And may you seek always to love the person more than our position.